What's up, guys? We're here in the 343 Industry Studios. I'm Jeff Easterling, Grim Brother 1, as some of you know, and I am joined by my good friend and colleague, franchise writer, Mr. Kenneth Peters. How's it going?
Good.
It's good to have you here. So what we are doing is we are kind of starting an interesting little thing that hopefully will kind of keep going if you guys have a good time with it and if you guys enjoy what you see. I see there's a whole bunch of you guys in the chat right now. Thank you so much for joining us. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to kind of do some streams that were dedicated to the lore, not just the fiction itself, but also kind of how we come up with some of these things and the kind of production values for what we do and how some of these products actually make it from mind onto your shelves and digital domains, etc. So I'm excited. Are you excited?
Yeah, totally excited.
Very cool, very cool. Usually, this is actually fun for us because usually we're just in secret hidden rooms talking about a lot of this stuff, but now we actually get to hang out with you guys and the fans. And in all honesty, one of the reasons why we wanted to do stuff like this and inspirations is because we have a great time, for example, like with our PAX community visit.
Yeah.
I know that you were a big part of that, and we always have a really good time with talking with everybody who likes to come out, and fans, community members from all over the world, all different kind of like disciplines and loves for Halo, but all coming together to chat about some cool stuff. And so that's what streams like this are going to be for. It's kind of a little more direct, a little more casual. But today we are going to be talking about a fan favorite guidebook that my man here was the primary penman for, and that is Halo Warfleet. It's something that people were really, really excited about, and I know that you were super excited about, not only just from personal, but also even your professional background kind of lends itself a little bit, and your personal passions were able to be on full display. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the production of the book itself, and we're going to be talking about some of the lore that is contained within. And along the way, and maybe a little bit after, we'll be taking some of your guys' questions as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. You can see the book right here behind us, and I want to I'll grab it. We'll move the prophet of clumsiness, because he's going to fall if we move this book too much. But here it is. The first thing that jumped out at me was the size of this thing. And I think it's fitting that a book about Halo ships is gigantic and oversized when compared to all other books on the shelves, because as some of you may know or may not know, Halo ships are huge. Like, yeah. Halo stuff in general is huge. So I think it's only fitting.
Yeah, half kilometer is a small Halo.
Yeah, that's like, oh, those are the baby ships.
Yeah, it's a little ship.
Yeah, that's crazy. So I mean, but this book is it's absolutely beautiful. It's got lots of really cool stuff inside. We're gonna kind of go through that. Oh, and by the way, we're gonna sign this as well and give one of these away on social right after this stream. So stay tuned for how you go about putting your name in the digital hat to take home a signed copy of one of these. So let's go ahead and start out. At the beginning, what was the kind of inspiration for doing a book like this?
Well, since I joined the studio, I've been wanting to do a cutaway book. It's one of my dream projects.
Yeah.
I've happened to have the opportunity to do quite a few of my dream projects since I've started here at 343. So we'll cover a little bit of the inspiration behind the production of Warfleet, but the primary inspiration for even pitching it was just our desire to have a ship guide or a detailed explanation of the interiors of some of these massive ships, the Forward Unto Dawn and Everclad, these iconic ships that are key locations in the Halo games. And they're massive ships. We see a little bit of them in the various games, particularly Halo Combat Evolved. And we see insides of Covenant ships in Halo Combat Evolved and also in Halo Reach. And just trying to figure out a way of taking all that information, bringing it together, and presenting it in a very friendly, approachable way that's good for both for reference and just as a general art book to look cool on a tabletop. And it was actually Egmont's, our publishing partner's, decision to do the large format. Originally, the idea was it would probably be a much smaller book,
closer to somewhere between the visual guide or the encyclopedias, and Mythos as well. Yeah.
And eventually, we decided to go with the large format, primarily actually to show off the amazing art that we were going to create for it. And so it was actually even a surprise to us when we first got the print proofs of, oh wow, this is actually a giant.
I know. I was like, is
book.
this the poster size version or is this the,
Yeah,
the actual size version?
So this is kind of an interesting little behind the scenes.
Yeah.
This is actually not the Warf. This is actually a preprint
This is from
document.
Mythos.
This is from Mythos.
Yeah.
But this shows you how big the pages are for the print proofs for a book. This is for the Mythos
This
one.
is what we get as we're trying to go basically going
With all
back
the
and forth
notations,
with the publisher, with the designs
notes.
and the layouts.
So we have like, the color balance is off, or we need to change some text that we spot. So imagine the Mythos one was even larger than this. So it was kind of a beast to handle.
And it's actually cool, not only from like people like us who, and other people in the studio who love the spaceship lore and everything, but there's also a pretty big desire for it from the community as well. Especially there's kind of a subset of the lore community even who really, really loves the ships. I know a bunch of you guys are out there kind of watching right now, especially, a great example is the Sins of the Prophets folks. Who is, if you don't know who they are, they're a community group that does a really, really cool mod for, I believe it's Homeworld.
No, it's Sins of the
Sins of the Solar Empire.
Sins of the Solar
that's true.
Empire, and now they have a Stellaris version of it, and there is a Homeworld Halo mod as well.
Yeah, so that's just one of our community groups that's super into this kind of stuff, and so this kind of book is really in a lot of ways a kind of a love letter to those folks as well who are always looking to glean more information in whatever way possible.
Yeah, name drop.
Oh yeah.
We actually are going to be doing more stuff about mods in the future, and speaking of Sins of the Prophet, they've actually implemented a lot of the new ships that were shown or described better in Warfleet in their mod, including the Gladius class.
Yeah, I was actually that specific ship.
Stormcutter.
We used that when we highlighted the Sins of the Prophets guys in a recent community update when they were up for, I think it was Mod DB,
Mod of the Year.
like Mod of the Year or something. And so we did a cool little feature with them there. And I remember seeing though, and the Stormcutter I think is the other new one. But it was super cool to see it literally jump from the page onto the screen, even through just really awesome community efforts. So, all right. So why don't we kind of go through the book itself and talk about some of the production?
Sure. So this is actually kind of twice removed presentation. So the Halo Seminar series is a series of presentations that the franchise team gives internally to the studio on various Halo topics. One of them that we did was Halo Warfleet. We did a cut-down version of this presentation for last year's PAX. So if you were here for PAX and you saw this presentation, it'll actually be a little bit different. There's stuff that we showed at PAX just because of the way the community was arranged and the people that were here. We had some different content. So you're probably not seeing anything new if you were here for PAX for this.
Although this way, in all honesty, there is a different kind of interaction as well. One of the reasons why we wanted to kind of start doing some of these, the seminar series that Kenneth mentions, is something that is kind of really for the studio itself. In a lot of ways, it's something to help refresh some of the deeper lore and ins and outs of the Halo universe, because with a big game development studio, you always have new people kind of rolling on and off of projects, and it's always good to kind of find ways to help them make sure that they are keeping up with everything, because everybody has big jobs to do and not necessarily a lot of time to do it, so it's always helpful to be able to have things like that. But one of the reasons why we wanted to do this was to kind of bring it to you guys, but in a little bit more of a conversational way, rather than just be more of a lecture style. So actually at PAX was actually much closer to what we do for the internal stuff. But this is cool because we get a chance to kind of like read the chat and respond to things, and even just talk, with each other on it.
Yeah, Halo Fleet Battles.
Oh, I'm saving my Halo Fleet Battles box,
Okay,
Too
so
soon.
whatever we want to get started showing the presentation.
All right.
So this is, again, if you were here for PAX, you've seen some of this. So just a general summary if you're not familiar with what Halo Warfleet is. It's 96 pages, very large format book. We had 10 full color cutaways. That was actually very important to have a cutaway book. It has to have some cutaways. And then we also have secondary spreads. And I've seen some of the reviews of the book, and some people don't like the cutaways, but those actually, in my opinion, one of the coolest parts of the book, because we had a lot of freedom to really go into more detail and technical information on kind of lesser known or small craft and fighters and things like that. So personally, in my opinion, the secondary spreads are some of the most interesting content in the book, and
And
some of
we
the definitely
actually-
most interesting content to write
What's
for.
funny too, we had some really neat response from some certain community members on those secondary spreads, because a lot of them were actually either 3D modelers themselves or people who were wanting to work with 3D models or recreate things, and they said that actually seeing the models of the ships in that format without the texturing was a huge, like a really cool thing for them, because they actually got to see a lot of the details in the sheer shape and design that sometimes get lost when you start to add the materials and the shaders and the texturing and things like that on there. So
Yeah, well, they were actually textured and shaders. They were for the render that we were using for them. We decided not to use the diffuse textures for a couple of reasons. One, it would actually obscure some of the model detail, particularly on like some of the Blair models. It would actually obscure some of the really cool little tiny fiddly detail, like for example on the Pelican dropship. There was a lot of discussion like how that treatment would be done on those secondary spreads. We eventually kind of settled on readability, because we had some ideas like, oh, they're all going to be like holograms. They're all going to like a technical display, like somebody's looking at it on a screen.
almost
and
blueprint kind
very
of
blueprint.
style, yeah.
And we experimented a little bit with that in Mythos with some of the treatment we did on some of the models in Mythos, kind of more of a blueprint.
Yeah, we did similar
style.
ones like High Charity and Spirit of Fire. There were several of them that we did in Mythos as secondary spreads
And they're
as well.
like there's illustrative renderers you can use that make it look like very nice line drawings, things like that. And eventually we decided just to kind of go with these nice kind of quote unquote gray box model renders. One of the things that Halo Warfleet also included was actually a galaxy map, and we're not going to go into too much detail on the galaxy map, but that's to say it was definitely one of the more work-intensive aspects of the book, just the back and forth. Nothing on the artist. Darren was the one who did the map, Darren Bacon, and he's an amazing artist. It was a lot of just controversy over like not only just internally like what should be shown on the map, and even in some cases where stuff should be shown on the map for various reasons, but also there was a lot of back and forth with Egmont, the publisher, because of actually print restrictions on the book. Originally, we were going to have way more annotations and notes on that map, but because of the print process that's actually used to physically produce the book, we couldn't do a lot of text annotations on the map itself because of actually localization. It ends up being that's
localization,
the
contrast regulations, even stuff like that.
Yeah, there was lots of issues because if we had text annotation, we had to make sure the box that it would be the text would be on would have to be basically kind of large to account for like when you count for like a German localization, for example, where some words can get pretty lengthy in German, and the box couldn't.
The book had to be about this tall. In Germany, so
8,000 letters for the German version of a ship
well,
name.
and something with the Galaxy map too is it's something that actually not just Halo sometimes struggles with from a fictional franchise standpoint, but a lot of anything that deals with like the galaxy or the Milky Way galaxy, and a lot of times you hear things that are thrown around that are more from a marketing buzzword or hyperbole. Everything is like
biggest battle in the universe.
Biggest battle in the universe.
It's not the universe.
Galaxy.
Maybe the galaxy.
Everything has this kind of grandiose nature to it. But when you really start to think about actual physics and the actual spaces involved with things like this, a lot of series actually, but Halo is one of them, takes place in a relatively localized, pretty small section of the Milky Way galaxy, which is pretty awesome because it actually allows for a lot of cool mystery to kind of still be there without. But we do have to take those things into account. We do still have to take into account the different locations of where things might be. The locations of the specific Halo rings are a good example of that.
Yeah, and so there were a lot of questions originally during the production about like what the scale of the map would be, or would it have multiple maps?
Yeah.
Like one example was, okay, we're definitely gonna have a galaxy map in the book, but do we also want to have a map of UNSC space that's kind of a little bit more centralized on Sol, and like maybe shows like 100 light year radius around Earth to show a lot of the inner colonies and some of the outer colonies? Do we want to have a map of Covenant space, which we've never seen before, at least publicly? How do we want to present that information? And eventually we decided we're just going to kind of go big picture. It was a little bit complicated to do, like, say, a local map of UNSC space for a couple of reasons. And one is that most of the action in Halo, even though we talk about it's a galaxy-wide adventure, in some cases you do go through the galaxy.
Or outside of it.
Yeah, but it tends to be kind of, you're in a little pinprick of space, whereas most of the actual action in the games that people are familiar with, and even the novels, is actually like 2 pixels on that galaxy map, and how to present that in a way that's understandable and legible was a task that we're just like, okay, we're just going to do a galaxy map and show the primary installations and some of the other little interesting little.
Well, and the galaxy map even kind of just
note.
some of that leads into like the next point, where that we wanted to also make sure that we had a broad focus overall of the book, not just focus on a UNSC space, but also include events and locations and happenings and entities and ships and stuff like that from Forerunner stuff and Covenant stuff and human stuff.
Yeah, and across the games. I mean, Halo's 16 years old, and there's been a lot of stories told in the Halo universe. You have all the way from locations of Halo Wars, Shield World to where's Requiem, things like that.
That was another really cool part actually of the production of the book. Is I remember a lot of focus room meetings where we were like, which craft do we want to do? All of these, and it's like, okay, how do we pare it down, and even just the selection process of the ships. I know that's one of the things that I've seen come up in community discussions is like, well, why did you pick this instead of this? It was like, in all honesty, that was going to be inevitable no matter what, because we have some of the same question. We actually have like, oh man, I really wish we could have gotten this in instead of, not even necessarily instead of, because we definitely landed on stuff that we wanted, but in addition to, but. Just a lot of constraints, and as we will see actually as we kind of go through. Yeah,
like I personally would have liked to have more close-in studies of some of the technology, like on the engines, how does a fusion drive work. We had a bunch of technical architecture information, which I'll mention a little bit when the book kind of changed style early on.
This will kill people like CIA, but there are paragraphs and paragraphs.
It's not
paragraphs
lost.
of yet unpublic text.
Makes me sad thinking about it. But we did have to cover
carefully curated.
Yeah, but we did have to cover Forerunner, Covenant, Human. We had to cover a wide breadth of information, and so some stuff kind of had to get, I hate to say it, but simplified, both because of the audience of the book and also just the length that we had. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, these are huge pages. There was a lot of restrictions on. We can't do 8-point font or anything like that. It just wouldn't be very readable.
No.
But the marketing highlights, kind of the high-level overview and kind of how we pitched it. We're going to see the insides of these iconic Halo vessels, all the way from the Pillar of Autumn to the Forerunner Dreadnought, the key ship. And we'd also learn a lot of cool little details and information about various other craft from the UNSC, Covenant, the Forerunners, and other people. Like, for example, we don't cover anything about like Kig-Yar pirates or anything like that. Unfortunately, that was kind of out of the scope of this particular book. So the two main artists, Hans and John, well-known artists. There's actually not a huge pool of artists who do cross-sections. We found out when we were starting production.
A very
very select
discipline for art.
Yeah, there's a whole backstory behind that. I'm not going to get into it, but a lot of the artists that you see from like the classic, like the 60s and 70s, when you see lots of cross-sections of like cargo ships and airplanes, a lot of those artists have transitioned off to do other things, and it was kind of a skill set that's almost not been lost, but it's a rare now with digital and CAD CAM. Whereas all the art in this book, and this was intentional, was all hand drawn. These are all physical pieces of art that were painted and drawn and then sketched and then scanned and put in this book. These are not digital paintings for the cross-section books. Yeah. That was intentional to make sure that they all looked similar and had a very specific artistic style that we were looking for. But as part of this process, we also were lucky enough to get new original art pieces, just like we did for Halo Mythos, particularly because I'm a huge fan of Isaac's work. We got Isaac Hannaford to do some new ships, and old ships, actually, in some cases, that you got to work on. The incredibly skilled Darren Bacon, who he's a fanboy that get to work with the art team here, because we have some incredible artists. Barth and Darren are amazing.
They're so amazing.
And they're super nice guys, too.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, the star of the show here was me, obviously, writing this book, which I'm sure all the people here on the chat, that's what they were here to get the book
No,
for.
that's the...
This goes without saying. I mean, come on.
Creme de la creme.
Yeah. So the inspiration behind the book, when we were first brainstorming, at least my original first pass idea is this is going to be a technical architecture handbook. So the inspirations I had for this book coming in were things like the old BattleTech technical readout books, if people remember those, the old FOSSA Star Trek ship recognition manuals. I'm a big fan of GURPS, pen and paper, so things like GURPS vehicles, which I could get into detail on some of the GURPS stuff, which is interesting how it ties in with Halo now. But that became much...
I wonder if you're aging yourself.
I kind of am aging myself because GURPS is kind of an older system. I'm in a lot of those books as playtester and stuff like that. So, but the original ideas would be much more technical, very text heavy, going into lots of details like how does fusion drives work? You know, how do pinch fusion covenant reactors work? How does the slip space work on a more fundamental
the
technical
slip space
level?
one, I remember
many meetings about slip
many
space.
meetings in a focus room actually originally in the old building.
Yeah.
And you and me and Jeremy with a whiteboard and trying to kind of like codify in many ways how slip space works and some of the space travel works in the Halo universe, which is interesting, trying to justify all of the different sources over a long-standing
and by justify we mean actually fitting them together, because 16 years of different people, different ideas, and it's kind of funny, different even artistic representations of slip space can be difficult to like compared like some textual
what
reference.
does it look like when you're traveling?
Yeah, can you see? Because in the books you can't see anything; it's black. Whereas in obviously most of the presentations you see in the video games and animations and stuff, you see the kind of classic hyperspace tunnel effect going on. Yeah. But unfortunately, that would be pretty high level and probably of interest maybe to the super duper fans. Yeah. So there's actually quite a bit that we wrote for that. There's a lot of stuff that was in the Halo Bible, which is the Halo Bible is not just necessarily one work, but it's a series of documents that are kind of the design documentation. In a way. Yeah, and there's various versions of it. Yeah, and then now we've kind of taken it from literally pages, and now a lot of it's in our own internal wiki and so on. Yep. But then we also expanded that to explain contragravity and all these other systems that are in Halo that are just kind of like a one-off mention, plasma torpedoes, things like that. It became a little bit too high level for what Egmont was wanting, and then even I was looking at it, I'm like, I don't think this is going to be a mass appeal type of book. Yeah. As much as I like things like the Star Trek technical manual and stuff like that. I think it's
an important thing to bring up, too, because I know that there are people in chat, too. You're like, no, why? Like, just do that. But if you think about it, that is one of the decisions that you kind of have to make when we're deciding what kind of products are we going to make, and there has to be a balance. And we try really hard to find all sorts of ways to get some of that information. Or the people just yelling. Oh man.
Yeah, and so speaking to one of the questions was, will we ever be able to see this information that was written and kind of ended up on the quote unquote cutting room floor? It's not lost. Most of that information is now in our internal wiki.
Yeah, well, and again, that's kind of what I was saying. Is like a lot of times that information, it surfaces up in other places. Cannon fodder is an example, or something like this is an example, or we can use that stuff when if we're writing new strings for something, or even if it could be used on, let's say, Dark Horse does a new model of a ship, and we have text that was unused from a book that can be leveraged then for that. So there's all sorts of ways that we try to get and leverage actually that work for future projects. But at the end of the day, and I know it's sad for you guys to hear, sometimes one of the best things that does is, even if it doesn't ever get public, it's great information to inform internal teams here on further production stuff.
Yeah, it kind of enriches the universe for other people, and kind
of helps set rules. Basically.
And it does show up. There's information that was, for example, in Mythos, this huge and long thing, the history of the interstellar war, or interplanetary war, the history of the interplanetary war, which is much more in depth in our internal write-ups that has kind of been broken up and put in different spots. So the political situation within the UEG, some of that ended up in the Halo 5. Lore strings for armors,
lore strings for armors,
which can sometimes be weird because then that information doesn't get released in a way that we thought, and so then again there's these like little disconnected little pinpricks into the story, and you're like, wait, PMCs and these guys are making their own Spartans.
Love communities like Halopedia and Halo Nation, who in all honesty are great resources for fans, but also even good like kind of double checks for us as well, because we only have so much time to even take all of those disparate pieces and put them together for our internal sources. So it's super awesome to have communities that are so passionate and dedicated to do that.
Yeah, sometimes
well.
they connect points that we don't actually
That's true.
intended to be connected.
That is true.
And since we don't like go into Halopedia and like edit articles, sometimes we see stuff like on Halopedia and we're like,
We want to.
that's not what we intended. That is not true. That is fake news. But we just kind of have to live with it sometimes. And sometimes that's what we use like cannon fodder to help correct some of these misconceptions that do arise. So, but the revised idea for it was we would take some of that ship recognition manual idea and we would double down on cross sections, because actually the original idea was this wouldn't really be a cross section book. It would have like 2 cross sections. We were going to do definitely the pillar bottom and the truth reconciliation. But then we made it actual real cross section book, because you really couldn't call a book a cross section book if it has like 2 cross sections.
Yeah, it's been funny. People are like, "Why isn't the whole thing cross section?" I'm like, "We actually have more cross sections."
Yeah,
and
we will cover why don't we have 80 cross sections?
Yeah,
Which,
and we can talk about that
we'll talk
actually
a little
in just
bit
a few
about
minutes.
this.
Yeah, for the actual.
So
production of
after
those
all
as
this, we're going back and forth with the publishing partner, with the consumer products team, with the franchise team, with community and other actors, including the concept team here internally. We decided it would be a large format, which we did not at first realize it would be this large format. Cross-section book that would completely focus on ships, because one of the original ideas was that we'd actually have cross-sections of some of the ground vehicles. In fact, one of the sample art packages we sent to Egmont was a cross-section of the Warhog, showing like the engine layout and the fuel cells and the water tanks on the back, which are not fuel tanks that are on the back of the Halo 4, Halo 5 Warhog. But all that kind of information, they're like, no, let's just focus on the ships. So we do show, for example, the Warhog as one of the secondary pieces, but it's not a cutaway.
Well, it's also
Maybe
there
in a
for
future
scale
book.
even too.
Yes, and we did a lot of bananas for scale or Warhogs for scale. Actually, the Warhog did become our banana for scale in the book, because we often have the Warhog intentionally next to certain ships that then
the
show up
Warthog
as scale
and the
for other
Pelican,
ships.
especially.
But that was the final green light. And so then we actually went into actual production of the book, and this is actually an early concept.
I was going to say, I love this piece actually.
This is an early Isaac concept of the slipspace drives for the humans, Forerunners, and the Covenant. So early production, this actually kicked off in 2015, which is hard to believe it's been that long. That's when we started collecting reference, or I was collecting reference from our internal systems, internal concept art, screenshots, sometimes going in on the dev kits and taking, especially like a truth reconciliation, flying through the hallway, taking screenshots, making sure we have the surface treatments right and locations of key features in the ship. Then we also brought in Hans, originally Richard Chasemore, who's his partner that worked a lot on the incredible cross sections for Star Wars. It's his partner. He was actually originally on board with this. It would be Hans and Richard. Unfortunately, due to other commitments, Richard had to bow out, unfortunately, at least for this project. But then we got a replacement, which is John, who did a fantastic job. And then
Apparently
the idea
what
was,
happens in slip space stays in slip space.
and it'd be cool if he was part of it, because then it'd be very classic, Star Wars cross sections book kind of team. But then we brought John on board, and then there's back and forth, and then the decision was that Hans would do all of the, especially the human ships, and then John would do the alien ships. So that includes the Forerunner vessels. And then Hans would basically do a pass on the art to make sure it was all a consistent art style. So you will notice there's a little bit of art style difference between the human and alien ships, but I think they came out awesome. So that was kind of the initial, making sure we got the artists. And getting artists, like we kind of mentioned, there's a very limited pool of artists who do cross sections, especially the kind of cross sections we were looking for. It's not like there's like 8,000 guys out there that we can just go pick and choose from. But also specifically, we definitely wanted Hans. Hans was number one on our list for cross sections. So all cross sections, and this is part of why we don't have 8 million cross sections in the book. It's actually a very involved process, and it takes a very long time. In fact, you'll see as some of the slides following, which show the process and timeline for these art pieces, it takes quite a long time to get one of these cross sections done. And if we had more, you'd probably still be waiting for Warfleet. It takes a very long time.
You'll actually see some of the dates on there as we
some of the art was coming in just before we needed to go to print. So unfortunately, that was one reason why we don't have 20 or 30 cross sections.
We would love more.
Yeah, we definitely love more. And there were some that were done in pencils that we eventually decided not to pursue. Yeah. So all these start as what we call pencils. That's the initial sketches. And you'll see some of those that are very rough. They're sometimes called napkin sketches. And that's intentional because we're not looking for like details. We're just simply looking for composition, like what view angle we want to do.
The viewing angle is actually one of the biggest things with specifically the cross section pieces that we all just kind of had to like mull over and like, okay, well, what is the best angle to show what? If you're going to cut something away, what is the big thing to focus on specifically for this ship? What's an important thing? We want to focus on the weapon systems or the crew compartments or the reactors.
And the size of the Halo ships is actually one of the limiting factors here because, for example, the Infinity is 5 kilometers long. So we can't really show a view that shows all of the systems inside of the Infinity. We had to basically, we're rotating it around and talking to spar.
It's a very Where's Waldo kind of thing, where it's just like everything kind of runs
The ships
together.
are so huge that you have to focus kind of on, well, we want to show the engines of the Infinity, for example. That's what we finally decided on. We're going to focus on the engines. We could have focused, for example, on the bridge and on the Mac cannons, but we're like, okay, engines are the most important part. So that's why it ends up having that kind of rear look. After everybody agrees that that's the angle and that's kind of the overall look of the ship, it goes on to inks, and those are actually the line drawings. Now, every artist has their own way of handling this process. Like Hans basically doesn't do inks; he basically goes right from pencil right to color, like right to the end, which is kind of interesting. And we had actually go back and basically redo ink drawings, partly for the actual interchapter stuff, but we needed an actual line drawing of the pillar bottom. And then it goes on to color, which is the final pass, which is a combination now of hand-drawn. In fact, I'll see a picture later on of what that looks like. And then it's scanned at extremely high resolution. One of them was like 8,000 by 6,000 pixels at 400 DPI. They're extremely large files when they're scanned. And then they do another pass on top of that to correct any last-minute issues that we find, which we did find some, for example, in the Pillar of Autumn. And also just to make sure that the color treatment and the kind of visual look of all the art pieces is consistent across the board. And then there's any additional stuff that, like, say, Egmont needs for print, like, oh, well, this color is not going to print well on the printers that we're using, or things like that.
We'll check some out.
So this is the pencils. This is the initial exploration step showing some of the near final sketches that we had. There was obviously way more iterations of these that we passed through.
Even just when I see these, I get mad because of how good they are.
But yeah, this is like literally like seconds of the artist is sketching something to show what they look like. These are all Hans.
Slapdash.
So note the date. This is February 2016. They were approved. So now we're going to just showing an example. Here's what the Pillar of Autumn. So that's the rough final pencil sketch by Hans. So March 2016. You can already see he's gotten the rough shape, from just a few seconds of work. And then this is like literally the next thing we got from him. So he's like approved sketch, like a napkin sketch. And I was actually kind of worried. I'm like, oh man, is this like the actual process where I could have drawn that? And then he goes right to this. I'm like, oh, well, okay, I can't draw
never
this.
mind.
I'm not going to do it.
Touche.
And this is actually what he considers kind of an advanced pencil. We call it an ink because it's basically an ink drawing, but this is what he basically considers a pencil. It's not actually even the final version of it. So, and he's actually done some labeling. And if you can somehow zoom in on the text, you'll see that some of these are actually mislabeled. And that's actually not an issue. Oh, yeah, I can. Whoa, this is zoom in cam. That's crazy. Oh, we're using an Xbox controller. We're using the Xbox actually to view this. There's like the armored Mac projectile, Mac breach. So this is kind of like his, based on the information we gave him, his explanation of what some of the stuff was that we didn't specifically give call outs for. And then we would correct and say, no, this needs to be changed. Or needs to be moved.
We have another
like the Mac breach actually was
ship name
something.
suggested the Column of Winter.
The Column of Winter. The 200 DPI of Autumn.
Yeah.
So the Pillar of Autumn is an interesting ship, and we've gotten a lot of questions about why, like where stuff is, because for example, it doesn't match what you see in Halo Combat Evolved. And after that was
Never has.
Never has, but that was a lot of. We made best efforts. And Stephen Loftus, who is a friend of ours
I
and
was just
also
gonna
a
say,
technical
it's a
consultant.
great time to shout out Stephen Loftus,
Yes,
who has
this-
been
this book would literally
long-time
not have been done
curator
without him.
this kind of information, and is an invaluable resource to a lot of things. This book was on Mythos as well, and on other projects.
Yeah.
Loftus is a cut above. He's like, his impact on stuff like this is awesome.
Yeah, and speaking of like early cutaway, like he was one of the first ones to be taking like the models and
Yeah.
like looking inside and see how the levels
Yep.
actually fit inside of the ship models and all that. Kind
I
of
love
stuff.
his ardent prayer stuff specifically.
Yeah. And this is an example of what this is what it really looks like. This is the physical painting that Hans finished. So it's about almost a little over a foot in length. And then this is what was scanned. And then we moved on to the kind of the digital part of it. And they're actually going to be selling all of the original prints at some point here. So get your pocketbooks ready.
Oh,
they are
yeah.
not cheap, by the way.
I don't think my pocketbook. I don't think my pockets, period, are deep enough for it. But oh man,
Yeah.
how nice that would
But it'd be
to have.
very cool. So, but this is actual physical.
Somebody, Kevin Hurd or Laird or something.
Somebody
they'll pony it up.
will shell out for it. They'll mortgage their house for the original art. And then it goes to digital, and there's other edits that are made. So you notice this is the final painting. There's actually some differences. For one, you don't see the Iroquois stripe on it, and it's actually missing one of the side turrets. It's one of the things we noticed at the end. It's like, oh, whoops, it's missing one of the turrets. So this is an example of taking that original drawing, and we did additional color pass and did some other minor digital edits. We added the turret back in, we added the stripe and all that kind of fun stuff. So there is a final cleanup pass, and that was done in February 2017. So not too much before the book was getting ready to go to the printer, and we finally got it.
Literally coming in hot.
But we were super happy with how this book came out and how the art came out. Again, because we had to save them out as PNGs. These are not the original source images. So when I zoom in, it's going to get a little pixelated. But if you have the book at home, you can kind of follow along. So some of the things we did for the cutaway, like we're definitely trying to make sure this is the definitive version of these ships.
Yeah.
So there's lots of detail that's either only been mentioned in the technical readouts, and it's not actually on the models themselves.
Well, it's in some ways an amalgamation of
it's
different
definitive version, and
editions
that means it's not any one. Like this has the general shape of the model from Reach, but it has all of the features that are listed in the technical manual or technical descriptions and the technical information about the ship, and textual information and information from Halo Combat Evolved. So that includes, we added the Rampart Point defense guns. It actually has an ODST drop bay, similar to the ones that are also used on the Marathon.
Yeah.
And as to why it doesn't actually match what you see in Halo Combat Evolved, we'll show why that's the case. And there was much...
Because gameplay.
Yeah, because the game levels
Because video game.
are not rational in the sense of actually
happens.
matching to the ship.
You live.
Yeah. And then go into the...
We have to.
Yeah, we have to. So this is an example of the pencil for the Truth Reconciliation. Just kind of, again, the layout and what we're going to emphasize. In this case, you can already see that he already kind of sketched out that we're going to emphasize some of the elements that are in the front of the ship. Areas that you don't see in Halo Combat Evolved. And then we get the nice ink drawing in October 2016, which is pretty much, this is the final. We had like some minor little changes that we had made in this. And then it went on to be the final color. And let me tell you, this ship, and the reason why I have it on this one, not some of the other ships that we did, is that the amount of discussion this ship had on the final color of the ship. I'm sure there's some people and they're like, that's the wrong color of the ship or something, but
You're the wrong color.
yeah, you're out of order.
You're the wrong ship color.
Because this ship is actually depending on what game and what lighting conditions, especially if you go back and look at the original diffuse maps of the ship, it kind of is all over the place. So we eventually kind of settled on nope, this is the version that we're going to use is this particular one. It's not going to be as gray as some of the original ones could have been. And also just the ship colors of cruisers in general in Halo is all over the place. Like in Halo 2
Somebody in the chat,
original,
by the way, just said that 343's art solution is that if it doesn't look like we throw stripes on it. I think that they're maybe
stripes on
saying
this?
that like that on the Pillar of Autumn that we just threw stripes on there.
On the Pillar of Autumn?
For no good reason on one of the the last cutaways. The looks like the Iroquois stripes on there.
That's not just throw it in.
Yeah, I know.
No, there's a reason why that's there.
Just to throw
Yeah,
stripe for no good reason.
I'm not going to get. You're not dragging me down, Shaq.
We were going to go with plaid.
I'm taking the high road here. So, but this Truth and Reconciliation is also a challenge because you actually play inside of the ship, and it is a fairly rational ship design in that the level that you play around in Halo Combat Evolved actually does match the whole of the ship for the most part. So we definitely made much more concessions on the Truth and Reconciliation to match what you see in the game, so you can kind of follow your path through the ship a little bit better.
Yeah.
For the Truth and Reconciliation level, so you can kind of see where the bridge would be, where the brig would be.
And if you ever
Hainer
need
Bay.
to deliver a space pickle, you know where to take it.
Yeah. Or somehow get inside of a spirit ship and then ram a hunter, even though there's no way they could have gotten inside of it in the cutscene, but hey. So there were some lessons learned. I think this is kind of like the more interesting aspect of this presentation, because now we've kind of shown what you've already seen. You already have the physical book in your grubby paws, but now we're going to talk a little bit about behind the scenes elements of how the book was made, some challenges, which is not something you hear about a lot in these books. I certainly don't know too many presentations that talk about the production of this type of book. So first and foremost, budget and time. I saw some comments in the chat about how long it takes to make these books, and yes, it can take a while. And this is actually a fairly quick process. We already knew what the ships were. We already often had a lot of reference for these ships. We knew exactly what they were going to be. Or if we had to come up with all this stuff from scratch, it would have taken even longer. So
it's one of the nice things, in all honesty, dealing with like a video game property is a lot of times you at least have certain starting points with some of the models and even some of the interiors.
But that's also a misnomer, because a lot of people are like, well, you have the high poly models. You can just take those and just throw them in. Like, no. Like, especially as what counts as like high poly, for example, has changed over time. And what counted as a very high poly model for Halo Combat Evolved back in 2001 wouldn't cut the mustard as a high poly model in 2018. So these spreads do take a long time because we intentionally made that decision to make sure these were actual physical pieces of art. That also adds additional time. So we didn't just take 3D renders and like pretty them up and do paint overs. We actually did drawings of this, and that was intentional. We could have done a similar type of cutaway with like more CAD CAM style. That would probably have been a little faster production wise, but that's not the style we were going for. Big challenge for me. This is not, and unfortunately some of the people that are big fans of that technical type of readout approach, was the word count was reduced by an order of magnitude. One of the original ideas, I don't know if people have seen the cutaway book that recently came out for Eve. They recently did a cutaway book, which I think is pretty cool. And they took a different approach to their cutaways, which I thought was interesting. But they also had basically a 2-page spread on each ship that was just like lore and background. And that was actually the original idea we had. I'm like, that was just what we wanted to do.
Yep.
And we had to remove those because it was just becoming too drawn out. It wasn't starting to look more like a technical manual, not an art book, not a cutaway book that we were going for. So those got removed, and so that's some of that text that basically got moved to our internal wiki, unfortunately, at least unfortunate for me. And what's funny is, like, I note this is after the draft text is already written, so we already had well over 2,000 words per ship that were written, and with a lot of technical little notes and stuff like that. And so some of those like little call-outs that in the book are just like fusion reactor was like, fusion reactor, and then it had a bunch of explanations for it. Technical specifications. We cut a lot of technical specifications as well during this process. I put ouch. That's still painful process for this book, but it's
That's true.
the concessions you have to make in any sort of collaborative.
Also,
creative
CG,
endeavor.
I see you in the chat, and you're grounded.
And then we also added additional secondary spreads. The idea was originally going in that we were going to have secondary spreads showing things like the Pelican, showing drop ships, showing like the escape pods and things like that. But because of the kind of change in the format,
Prowler might be my favorite.
yeah, like we were going to have the Aladdin and other ships like that in there. So when those kind of got shuffled around, we added more of those secondary spreads to make sure there was still a lot of that content was still preserved, but in a different format and kind of cut down. So
Big
franchise.
shout out to folks like Carlos and Tyler for those.
Yes,
like,
Carlos and Tyler, who are two producers / artists on the franchise team, they did all that in-house internally.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about that was that Carlos and Tyler literally sit 5 feet from me.
Right, yeah.
So there was lots of back and forth on exactly where stuff was, what do we want to highlight.
Yeah.
I think where that really shone was actually the Forerunner ships.
The Forerunner stuff,
which
yeah.
for the secondary spreads in that book, the Forerunner spreads are by far my favorite in the book. I really love how those turned out with that kind of glass look, which is pretty consistent with kind of the feel that I got from the Greg Bear novels for how the internals of Forerunner ships are organized. So we did some franchise challenge, and this is I'm talking very high level here, like some issues going into this book, is that we didn't really have a lot of detail on the ships, at least not the level of detail that we wanted to show for the book. That includes like where exactly are all the point defense guns?
Yeah.
Whew, well, that's a tough one, especially on things like the Infinity, where it has literally thousands.
And again, it's
of those guns,
big
and it's
too,
so huge you
even
wouldn't be able
how
to see them.
Yeah, even when we're trying to figure out, well, where would they go or how would we portray them? It's even tough to see.
Yeah. So that was a big challenge of just lacking certain elements of detail that the artists wanted, especially on the interior sections of these ships that you don't actually play in during the game, because it's a little hard to find internal reference for, what the deck layout was and things like that. So there's also inconsistent internal reference for the ships. So that includes in the text, like for example, how the Pillar of Autumn is described in Halo Fall of Reach versus what you actually see in Halo Combat Evolved versus the update in Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary versus its presentation in Halo Reach versus other presentations for other projects. So trying to figure out what's the best combination of all those and making sure they're all as consistent as possible, because there are going to be inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Any sort of long-running franchise is going to run into inconsistencies between sources, between presentations. Our job is to minimize the delta of those discrepancies.
Yep.
We're not trying to explain them away sometimes. Sometimes we can or we have to. But in those cases, it's more like, okay, well, we have these 4 choices. They're all pretty similar. We're just going to choose one. That's the one we're going forward with. But
that's one of the toughest things really for us to do sometimes. But it's also like it's a healthy thing to be able to do and like put some stakes in the ground and move. Move
yeah, and I think
certain
people have a
things.
misconception that there's like just one person who's like the overlord of canon.
No.
Sometimes that's not the case.
Nope, definitely
it's definitely a group effort,
effort.
and there's multiple stakeholders in any of these projects. Like even in this book, it wasn't just like, oh, I'm the writer, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
We had our publishing partner, we had the artists that were working with us and what they could do. Like for example,
Well, and even in the writing, we would all discuss.
make sure that what we
like-
wrote is okay. Is this what we want to have
Yeah.
in there? We want to say there was
Exactly.
lots of like the galaxy map is another good example. There was lots of stakeholders. Like, are you sure that we're okay with showing this on the map? I'm like, okay, that's okay. And then you come back later and you have to sometimes double check. Like, okay, we're just circling back on this. Are you sure this is okay? I'm like, yeah, okay, it's okay. And they're like, okay, sweet. I got the green light. Well, now it's in a book, so now they can't take it back.
That's true.
And we also need to make sure what can we actually commit to going forward. So this is a very big challenge from the franchise team of always, we have all these products and all these different stuff coming out for the Halo franchise, comics and, live action projects and
I mean, this
video
goes into a lot of,
games.
even when people ask us about like, oh, will you answer something on social media, or will you answer something in an update or on a cannon fodder or on something like that, is every time that we do that, we have to try to be committing to something that we're then putting a stake in the ground on, even if it's something that seems small.
Yes,
But
and
a lot
I
of times
learned, I got burned on that.
Yeah, people will ask questions that there's no good reason to have answers to. And sometimes you guys, you don't realize that you don't want answers to certain questions. Trust us.
I mean, I could go into more detail on that, and it's a little complicated
Yeah.
because, like for example, I did catalog for a while on the Halo forums, and that was a lot of fun. And one of the reasons I stopped doing that was actually that, a lot of the questions were just like mundane stuff, like, oh, what's the average shoe size of a Covenant sailor? Like, who cares? That's the kind of questions you often get asked. But
Chad's gonna freak out now.
now they're asking,
cares?
who asked? Yeah, I care about the Covenant, the shoe size. But also the issue is that even the seeming minor little detail that you would reveal that at the time was perfectly accurate or true, or that was nobody's ever going to touch this again. Well, guess what? Somebody wants to do a book about it, and you're like, well, we said this, and they're like, well, is that true? And they're like, well, we didn't think you were ever going to do anything with that. And so sometimes you got to be careful about boxing, putting yourself in a corner, painting yourself in a corner, or unintentionally setting stuff up that people are thinking are going to have a payoff.
It causes stumbling blocks in the future where we either have to change it for the greater good of something, and then fans get mad because we changed it. But a lot of times it's like, well, we only said it in the first place because you asked. So
that's definitely a challenge. Even with this book,
Yeah.
it was a challenge. We removed there's actually again those technical details I mentioned. Some of those were removed because eventually we were like, does this really need to be in there? Do we really need to get that nitty gritty
And again,
on how many
never know when
gigawatts
it
of
may
output a power
actually
reactor is?
do the story or the entity that you're dealing with more good to have a different answer later on, and it's better to not have to unwrite this. So we really don't like changing things, retconning, like whenever possible.
Yeah, and we'll have actually a case example of why it can be dangerous to print certain values. I mean, other franchises have definitely found this out, where you get too specific and it can cause you issues later on. But we did want to make sure that we could lean into upcoming content, so it wasn't like stuff we have here just stops and nothing from this book will ever be mentioned again. But we also make sure we're not trying to lean too much into future projects where we're kind of showing our hand for what's coming down the pipe.
Sorry.
Yeah, so it'd been interesting, but it would have been harder to get this book approved. So art challenges. We've mentioned before. We mentioned it a lot. The scale of Halo is massive. Like if anybody's ever been here to visit the Halo Museum, you can see the full-sized like weapon props and the full-sized Master Chief and Noble Team and stuff like that, and you realize how giant a Spartan actually is in real life, and how big these Halo weapons really are. Well, then you get into starships, and you're talking a 500-meter ship is a tiny little frigate that's almost inconsequential, and they're getting one shot in space battle scenes. They're just like chaff. And Halo ships are big. Anybody seen the comparison shot of like all the different sci-fi universes? And Halo ships are.
Yep.
We have ships that they don't even show on there because they're bigger than the Death Star. The Mantle's approach is
Huge.
mind-bogglingly massive. So
This is actually one of the reasons, speaking of Warfleet, that it's classified really as a battle station rather than just
it's a mobile fortress more than a ship
itself. Yeah.
And so even Hans has literally drawn the Death Star. Okay, I mean he knows big ships. Star Wars ships are pretty big. Our ships make Star Wars ships look like little frigates and fighter crafts in some cases. So even Hans was actually having some issues. Yeah. High Charity turned out to be probably the hardest one to do, and one
of my favorites though.
It was a challenging one to do, and we wish we could have done more. But the problem was that when John was going in and we tried doing like small detail, like showing habitat spheres, like kind of maybe quote unquote a little bit more real scale how big a habitat sphere would be, and that's kind of floating around inside of High Charity in the lower decks, you wouldn't be able to see it.
Yep.
Because High Charity is so huge. It's hundreds of kilometers in diameter. It's like
there's only so much you can
show. Yeah, without literally being noise on the screen. The high poly source material we had was very varied. Some of them had a lot of the surface detail was actually baked into secondary maps, so normal maps and displacement maps. Particularly, for example, the stuff from Blur, they use lots of displacement maps. So if you just do a normal render, it's not going to show up. You have to make sure you render with the displacement maps. So sometimes we need to remodel the ships to make sure we had good reference to give to the artists, because they weren't like just doing paint overs. They were actually redrawing the ship. And we also needed to make sure we matched the final authoritative statistical information. So that includes the weapon loadouts of the ship. So there was lots of like counting guns, counting missile pods. A lot of talking to Stephen Loftus because he's super concerned about
what
exactly
is the complement
matching
of this particular weapon or point defense.
How many Archer tubes are on the ship? In some cases, we had to go against even usually typically textual information is kind of the highest. We try to go with what's in the text. That's kind of like the most definitive source. But in some cases, time is marched on, and that textual information no longer matches what's ever been shown going forward.
Sometimes you have to go
particularly pillar bottom.
The model, the visual model.
Yeah, and eventually that's a lot of counting tubes and counting on the high poly.
Or doing a lot of measuring of like the bore size. Mat cannons.
Lots of going to 3ds Max and Maya and actually taking the measure tool and measuring the bore size of which even these point defense guns are basically tank cannons. Like they are no joke huge, like bigger than a Scorpion main gun. So they're point defense, but they're probably going to one-shot a Phantom if they hit it. So we had to make sure that all the art matched the final version. And then including, in some cases, slightly adjusting, like for example, in the visual guide or even in Mythos, like what stuff was pointed to. Like this is the point defense gun, and it's basically pointing to the secondary guns on the Halcyon class. That was an example where we didn't really change anything. We're just kind of like clarifying those are not the point defense guns. Those are the secondary.
See a question from chat. What made us saddest to have to cut?
Oh, definitely that 2,000 plus words just first draft of each ship.
Yeah.
Which would have gone into, if anybody's familiar with the old, I mentioned before as one of the inspirations was the BattleTech technical readouts.
Yep.
Where it would have had stuff about the manufacturer of the ship, how the keel was laid, what was the shakedown cruise like, what are some notable ships of the class that are not just the named ships.
Some of the ships of the line, I think, were one of the things specifically that I enjoyed, as we kind of we're coming up, whether it be ships that we have talked about or not talked about, and those are ones that I definitely wish that.
Yeah, and those are definitely that we're definitely like, for example, cruisers, where we have from this book and other reasons why we did it. Now we have a pretty definitive list of every cruiser in the Halo canon.
Yep.
And its status, like who its captain was, what its ship hull number is.
Yeah.
All that kind of information we have captured, and some of that would have actually been in Warfleet, but we had to cut it. And unfortunately, ships of the line stuff would have been really cool. So we also learned some additional lessons here, where we had some multiple design iterations. The Pillar of Autumn is probably the one that most people are most familiar with in terms of how the ship has changed over time and in different presentations. And I was very ambitious when I was sending over the initial reference package, and I included a lot of here's how the Pillar of Autumn's been shown in every version that it's ever been seen. Plus, here's a bunch of quotes from the books. And so the artists were looking at it and like, okay, well, these don't match. What do you want us to do? And since we weren't talking face-to-face with the artists, it was unfortunately lots of email loops going back and forth okay, we want to make sure that, using this style for the Halcyon class versus this style, we're going to be making sure the archer pods are shown this way.
Yeah.
Even Isaac Hannaford, like when we did the Gladius class, okay, no, an archer pod is this width, so that's how we're going to set the scale of the ship. So make sure that everything is scaled to the archer pod, because then the archer pod became our banana for scale.
Someone said to apologize for the Poseidon. I do apologize that it wasn't shown in more glory, because it's an awesome ship.
The Poseidon light carrier from Halo 4?
Take that.
Well, so that's an example of where the assets that we had were not of the quality level that we would have wanted to use for some of the secondary pieces, because they were just a background ship. How do we make a ground battles book happen? I'm fighting for it. I would definitely love to have more. I'm still trying to get the
money.
Yeah, send us money. I almost said something about the ground.
And obvious interest.
I almost said something about the ground battles.
Call
book.
your
I'm not
senator.
sure if I should have said, I almost said it, but I
not
didn't
Senator Del Rio, though.
Yeah, Del Rio, man, he's actually pretty cool. He was right. Del Rio was right.
He was. Yeah. Del Rio was right all along.
So we had multiple.
You should have given him the chip.
Yeah, the chips. Give him the chips. Wow. So there was some back and forth, which did I won't say waste time, but it did cause some unnecessary confusion with the artists going back and forth of what exactly should be shown and where. Particularly we would give them a source for here's the high poly model, but then they're like, well, this doesn't have the point defense guns. And we're like, oh, well, okay, I guess we have to now solve for where these point defense guns are. There's often, when you do a cutaway book, you're kind of faced with some real world realities of where stuff would have to be to even for the ship to function, that as a video game level or as just an art piece, you don't have to worry about how people get on the ship or where the fuel tanks are or are the weapons. Why don't you see the weapons? They should have been right next to the cargo hatch according to this art reference, but they're not showing other references.
We'll pull, guys, I see some of the questions in here. We're almost done here, so we're going to wrap this up, and then we'll grab a couple of questions from chat. So we do see most of them. We are ignoring a lot of them, too.
Yeah, but I'm trying to answer some.
To be totally honest.
And then we've already mentioned the galaxy map was a challenge because of production and layout realities, particularly the localization requirements, that we had to have black text. So we couldn't do any cool white text callouts on that black map. We had to basically have a box around the text. And we did do a test one where we had a bunch of those callouts as text boxes, and it looked terrible. Yeah. And it obscured a big chunk of the map.
It obscures the awesome art.
So we're like, no, we're not going to do that, sorry. And in some cases, because there's so many people involved, even internally here in the studio, we got to make sure that, like we talked about, are you sure you're okay with this? This is going to impact potentially something in the future. Are you cool with it? No, yeah, okay. Got approval, moving on.
This is a great
this is an example. This is a good Stephen Loftus reference piece that we used showing the Halo Combat Evolved first level, basically overlaid on top of, or overlaid inside. It's not even close. This doesn't include the trench run. So we looked at this and we're like, okay, and this is actually one of the references we sent to artists, and this is one of the pictures that caused a lot of confusion with the artists, because they're like, so what are we matching? are we matching this? Because this doesn't actually fit in the ship at all. Are we trying to are we going to scrunch it to fit in the ship? And we're like, eventually we decided, ignore this. Like we're keeping the overall relative topology of the ship, like where the hangar is located relative to the bridge, where the escape pods are located relative to the bridge, but we're not going to keep this exact layout for the cutaway.
Yeah.
In this case,
I love this one.
Where going into this, we thought the ship, this is going to be the easiest ship to do.
Super smooth.
Like 90% of the interior of the ship is detailed. For the art and prayer, if you see every nook and cranny of this ship, we have amazing reference. Like Stephen Loftus did this nice cutaway render showing like all the pieces. We're like, oh, perfect. This would be like the easiest ship to do. We're like, this artist is going to be able to get done with this in a week. No. Because what we found out is when we started looking closely, again, going to like where stuff would be in the ship, you look at the ship and you're like, but where do people sleep? Like, I'm assuming the Covenant don't just like in a T-pose stuck in a closet somewhere. That's not how it actually would work in the real world. So we had to do some magic there to make sure we had room for the crew, and that's also where we came up with some of the explanation of how the crew lives on the ship when they have no living area. There's no room for them to actually chill out. There's no rec halls on an SDV class Corvette.
No.
So this is an example of where something we thought was like, this is perfect. We have the entire ship detailed already.
Covenant racquetball.
There are still some issues that we had to address in the cutaway, and some problem solving. Just as an awesome piece, Isaac's piece with the Gladius and the storm cutters. The first goal, we had to make sure everything held up to close scrutiny. Again, these images are extremely large, and they could show tiny little details. And we need to make sure that if somebody got a hold of the 800 DPI image and they zoomed in, it would be consistent across the board. So that includes the design of the Rampart point defense guns. Those originally from the Strident class. That's actually the model, the Maya from the original high poly model on the Maya model for Halo 4, and make sure that matched across the board for all the other Ramparts. And also making sure that all of the weapons of the Pillar of Autumn were displayed, including the point defense guns, the secondary cannons, the archer pods, all that sort of stuff, and make sure that they don't cut into other areas of the ship.
Yeah, somebody has mentioned so the games aren't canon, and that's definitely not what we're saying with the case of the trench run with the Pillar of Autumn. It's just that when you have a discrepancy, you have to pick one or the other to override, and it's usually kind of a case-sensitive thing. It's like we were talking about a little earlier. A lot of times we defer to the text in something. With the case of the trench run, you see the Pillar of Autumn. It's more important to get the consistency of the actual visual ship right than to focus more on just the pathways in one specific level.
Yeah, and people need to remember that when these ships were originally being created, they were just set pieces or skybox objects or just kind of like set dressing for the scene. And so when we do a book like this, we do have to kind of do a consolidation process to bring all these sources together.
Yep.
We need to be flexible. We have 16 years of Halo canon.
This might be one of the first times people are seeing this.
I think this is the first time we've shown this ship, so you can actually get detail of it. So this is the frigate design from Halo 5, which you see in the actual intro scene where you see the silhouette of it moving around.
Yeah.
But these are the new style frigates from Halo 5 that replaced the Strident in its internal bay, the Onloss class. Actually, it kind of has a lifting body shape, which is pretty cool.
The real cool view of this ship is actually top down, so we'll have to maybe see if we can showcase that here.
This is an example of even at the time, pretty new reference that we provided to the authors so that they could put it in the art. So this is the ship you see coming out of the bays on the Infinity inside the book. So this is actually some unpublished Story Bible information that people that were here at PAX saw, but this is a direct quote from the Halo Story Bible talking about the fusion drive systems. So this is an example, and the reason why this is here is that this shows the problem if you get too detailed sometimes. For people, you have unintended consequences. So the key point here is talk about the fusion drive systems and how you can go from Luna to Pluto in 72 hours with a human military-grade fusion drive system. And that seems reasonable, but if you actually run the numbers, and I did, and I've ran the numbers on some weird stuff like the power output of a MAC cannon and stuff like that, it has some unintended consequences that are you don't want to deal with. So it's some basic math. I'm not going to go over that, but basically meant that the ship had a constant acceleration of 30 G, which ends up making the ship
squishy.
A very good weapon. Like you just accelerate your ship and hit a planet, it's going to cause a lot of damage. So, and the quote there is from Larry Niven about
just fire
There's in sci-fi, there's a thing called John's Law, which basically is corollary to Neller Niven's quote there. It basically says any cool space drive is also a very cool weapon.
Yeah.
So we ran some numbers like, okay, so we're not going to give accelerations for ships, partly because we see in Halo, in these photorealistic blur scenes, that a ship moving around in the atmosphere doesn't torch the atmosphere with its fusion drive systems. So we're pretty confident that the fusion drives won't vaporize planets. This was another issue that we found because again, we were trying to be very careful about exactly where stuff was located in the ship. Everything had to be plausible. It actually had to fit inside the ships. And the Hyperion was actually one of those items that was extremely difficult to get fit in the ship as shown in Halo 4.
Yeah.
Because the missile in cannon is 52 feet in diameter and 202 feet long. It's massive. It's bigger than pretty much, it's basically the size of a rocket in and of itself. And the frigate is, it's a measly 1,890 feet
Saturn
long.
V missiles.
Yeah. And that's what you're firing is like just a rocket. So getting it to fit in the ship, we really tried all sorts of stuff to try to make sure it fit in the ship. And eventually I found a really cool picture of a Juliet-class submarine.
Yeah.
And how it loaded its missiles was very cool. I'm like, that will work. And so this is just an example of a reference. This is a very quick 3ds Max mock-up I did just to kind of make sure that the 3 missiles would actually fit in a Trident. And this is the reference we provided for the authors. Actually, the cutaway for the ship didn't appear in the book, but we do have this ship is one of the secondary art spreads. And you can actually see, which is kind of cool, on the actual model, one of the top plates actually perfectly matches the size of that leveraging missile bay would have to be, which is pretty cool. So that's how it actually did fit. But if this is an example where if we could not get it to fit or it just simply didn't work, we probably would have to adjust some of the final numbers to get it to work. And it's just an example of some of the problems. Yeah, going right to the end. It's one of my favorite pictures. It's actually from Halo Wars 2. Yeah, and the end. One reason why it ends here is because, again, we cut out some additional information that was either at the PAX presentation. Yeah. That would be a little weird to show in this kind of public venue.
I love this show.
Or there was for the internal presentation stuff, which is definitely not good to have on a public presentation.
Nope.
And now we'll answer some of the questions.
So it's also some of the questions I've just been trying to pull out.
Not dabbing for Halo.
No, we're not dabbing. A Forerunner AI had asked about any particular Forerunner ships that we liked working. I know you and I both particularly loved working with the Dragoons from the OG Halo Wars.
Yeah, those ships are awesome.
That was really, really cool to be able to kind of flesh out. I remember a lot of cool conversations with you and I. Okay, like angling it this way, looking at how it appears in not only Halo Wars, but even some of the original Blur concepts for how it appears, and then also
art that never got released actually for that.
Yeah, and
showing the scale of it. One of the scales which has a Spirit of Fire next to it.
That's true. And then also how it appears in things like Halo Legends as well. So because you see it in there, so I think that was probably
we could do a whole discussion on the Dragoons because that was one of those examples where there's a lot of unpublished information that actually even the unpublished information didn't match each other.
Yep.
So we were like, okay, well, we're going to publish information about it. Well, which ones of these unpublished
cool
data
things
sets
with some of the, like the Guardians. Also, being able to reveal the name of the Forerunner Dreadnought, too, was the first first place that we got to do that. And even actually showcasing the Phaeton and doing some more of the lore.
The Phaeton ended up looking really cool. The high polys for all the Phaeton, the Forerunner stuff for 5 is amazing.
Digital release? Not that we
That's
know.
not up to us.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, it's not up to us. It's certainly not in the plans. We try to avoid the words definitely and never because we always end up getting proven wrong. But it's not in the plans now.
How do nanomachines work on ships? I'm not going to get into nanomachines. That's why I was part of the technical architecture stuff that didn't get published, and because it's not published, a little dangerous to say anything about how
I know a couple of questions
works.
we had earlier on to CIA, I think, had asked yesterday about the Morsam pattern for the Seraph. And the Morsam, what we show in Warfleet is the Chi pattern, which is the one that you see in like H2, H2A, H3. And the Morsam pattern is the Reach one.
Yeah, with the articulated impulse.
And there are others.
Another question that had come up was actually about the different types of cleansing beams.
Yes.
So that's
that
kind
was
of a
the other one.
misnomer.
Actually, you and I were discussing yesterday.
Basically, the way the Covenant energy weapons work, they're all kind of a broad category of tools dash weapons. They're kind of combinations, and so they're all energy projectors that are used for various uses. Another question.
It's very just to add to that real quick is it's. I mean, think of it like lasers. Like there are a lot of different types of lasers for a lot of different types of things. You can have a laser that is a weapon. You can have a laser that is for drilling or boring or cutting. You can have a laser that is for delivering information. You can have a laser that is for eye surgery. So it depends on just the type and the tuning and the use is really kind of
some of that's covered in the glossary where we had some of that tech background information. Yeah, and they also have like pulse lasers, which you see in Halo Legends, for example. But most of their weapons are plasma-based. The plasma torpedo, I know a lot of people are like, well, that doesn't match what it actually says specifically in First Strike. Well, I knew that. I've read the book, and we had all those references. But
we've read the books.
That in the Story Bible is the description that we basically used for the book. Yeah. And our decision was maybe this was not well communicated. Some of that information that got cut didn't convey it as well, but you can still use the explanation that's in First Strike for how those plasma weapons work and how the torpedoes were firing and being directed. They still work with the idea that you actually have a physical, plasma core that's being guided around. And it's also easy to explain in other ways.
So did Cortana change the forward unto dawn from 3 to 4? And no. And we've tackled that in many other places, but I know a lot of times new fans come in. Canonically, the forward unto dawn is the Sharon class. It's as you see it in Halo 3. In fact, if you go and look in the Universe Encyclopedia entry on Waypoint right now, very purposefully, you will see the depiction as Halo 3. There's a lot of things that go into how stuff gets portrayed, whether it's art style, for different reasons. And sometimes people don't like it, and that's okay. And sometimes you look and you realize, would have done that differently had we, to do over again. And then sometimes you just chalk it up to different differences, and some things are canonical, and you make adjustments where. But canonically, it's Forward Unto Dawn, Halo 3 style. So you can rest easy.
Yeah,
it's
like
okay.
Mac cannons. Okay. That's one reason why you get two. I'm not going to get into the Mac cannons.
What's your favorite Halo?
Two. Not even a competition.
Yep.
That's like
Halo 2 is the best.
Jeremy's Halo Combat Evolved.
So
it's a contentious point is what's your favorite Halo game? We sometimes ask that to people like, we don't want to start a fight, but what's your favorite Halo game?
Yep. Well, it's not really a fight. Halo 2 is better.
What is it with dabbing? Isn't dabbing like a year old now? It's like,
a thing.
Come on, got to give it the new memes, like Tide Pods or something.
Hello, fellow kids.
Yeah.
Halo
favorite
4
Elite
Anniversary.
Rendition. Halo 2 Anniversary for Elites. I love the way they looked in Halo 2 Anniversary.
Oh, for favorite style Elites? Yeah, definitely.
Paris class. Yeah, that was another example. Some of the other frigates we definitely would have wanted to have as cutaways. Some of the issues actually with some of the frigates, they all kind of end up looking alike. And so that was one of the reasons why we kind of tabled having too many of the frigates, because they're all kind of permutations of the same basic design for on the human side.
UNSC Tide Pod. Never mind. Go back to the dabbing.
Yeah, let's go back to dabbing. Best Forerunner art? Oh man, that's a tough one. For ships,
like in Warfleet or style, just overall.
I didn't say. I just said best Forerunner.
I love the Dragoons.
In the book definitely. I love how that turned out. Also doing the stuff on the Mantles Approach, kind of like showing a little bit more of the layout of the ship, because the Mantles Approach is a really cool ship. It's unfortunate you actually don't get to see all its cool functionality. You can, it's basically a giant transformer that's the size of a small moon, or actually bigger than some moons.
Why is the Halo 4 Elite?
They can go underwater. You see them underwater in certain cases.
I always love questions.
Thoughts
like
on drop pods? Why these particular pods? Why did we show? So the drop pod that's in the actual book. The reason why we chose that one versus there's basically two major styles of drop pods. We chose the one that's in the book primarily because we had multiple choices. Everybody agreed that we just wanted to use that style, the H2A basically style of drop pod of HEV. Which my favorite Halo commercial actually is the We Are ODST commercial. I just love that commercial. The silence, good. And then the door pops off, and then it's all the noise.
And the visors.
Yeah. Halo 3 ODST 2. Dream
I love that, and I love
Happen.
Deliver Hope.
So information like on the Vindication, basically like the Poseidon, a lot of those other ships that we just didn't have any room to put them in this book. That would have been like for things like if we just had like a fleet breakdown. Like that's a question we get asked a lot too, is like what's the actual organization of the UNSC fleet, how our fleet's organized. Some of that actually was in Halo Fleet Battles, and some of the ground information was actually in Halo Ground Command. If that series had continued, that's actually where some of that information would have been presented, because we always try to make sure that information is in a context that actually makes sense. We're not just going to randomly release an article on here's the Covenant Fleet Organization and how shipmasters work with admirals and how the fleet masters.
You guys would love that, but
how does lances work? What's a demi lance? All that kind of stuff. It's like, well, it'd be cool, but what's the right context for it? Not going to answer any questions about 343.
No.
Guilty Spark.
Or future
read the books.
Stuff.
Fleet Battles.
When are we getting a Halo Space Battles game?
Oh.
Not soon enough. We would love it too.
Fleet Battles, I can talk a little bit about that. Fleet Battles and Ground Command. Unfortunately, Spartan Games went out of business, so there's no continuation of that. We have no current plans to announce anything right now for a new tabletop game, which is unfortunate. I'm a huge tabletop gamer.
That was a lot of fun to work on.
And I actually loved working with those guys. Great team.
Really, really good guys.
Great sculptors. After the company shut down, we checked in with all their people, made sure that they were doing okay and everything was transitioning okay.
Is the Infinity waterproof?
Parts of it are, yes.
Yeah.
It's waterproof. How many pressures would it take? I mean, to be space capable, you actually don't need to be particularly well armored or anything to be holding an atmosphere. But favorite thing about the Infinity, I actually like how it has a giant park at the top of it.
Yes.
That people just go jogging in, and it's the size of a freaking town.
Yeah,
it's massive. The size of the Infinity is massive.
Park,
I mean, you don't really get a sense you take like the model, whatever, and then like you go in and like drop a biped.
I mean, again, it's when
in
you look
cannon,
at,
you're like,
you see
okay.
in Spartan Ops, with the frigates underslung that are just dropping out, and these ships are huge.
Yeah, each of those ships is 500 meters long. It's the scale of
Halo
just
dropping out. It
was a problem for the artists. It's really cool when you're in it, especially like in VR. Like if anybody's played the Recruit VR demo, where you kind of get a little bit of sense of scale for how big like an elite is, where they're towering above you. It's the scale of Halo is probably the coolest part of the ships and of the technology, but it's also hard to represent in cutaway books.
All right, guys. Well, we are going to go ahead and wrap things up here. We do want to give away a copy of Warfleet, and this one will actually be signed by several of us here at the studio. So even if you have a copy, it might do you some good to have a slightly more collectible one, or either that or we completely devalued it.
Long swords do not have slip-space drives.
Yes, long swords do not have slip-space drives. But if you want to enter for a chance to win the signed Warfleet copy, just tweet. You can tweet actually at me, at GrimBrother1. Use the hashtag WarfleetWednesday. Hashtag WarfleetWednesday. And tell me your favorite thing about Halo ships in general. We've talked about a lot of it today. Before we go, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Yesterday, speaking of awesome books, Kelly Gay's awesome Smoke and Shadow. Smoke and Shadow, not only was this the print release of the originally digital-only novella, but it also includes Into the Fire, which was kind of the accompanying story that was featured in Halo Fractures. So that just came out. Also, I believe that today Halo Wars 2 became part of, for the asking silly stuff in there, became part of the Xbox February 1st. I'm getting February 1st. Halo Wars 2 should be a part of the Xbox Game Pass. So we got a lot of really cool stuff going on. It's gonna be a fun year. We definitely hope to plan to do more of these. If you liked it, definitely tweet us and let us know. We would love to do more. Like I said, we are going to be covering a variety of different topics, different things around the universe, going into lots of interesting details and behind-the-scenes stuff. So if you liked it, let us know, because we would love to do more. And do you have a good time?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Awesome. So for my man Kenneth Peters, I'm Jeff, and thanks from everyone here at the studio. Thank you so much for tuning in for this kind of wacky and crazy super nerd session. But thank you so much, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
And no dabbing.
Bye-bye, guys.